We should have recorded the restaurant anecdotes as well. Yeah.
I don't know, man. That might expose you, and people might start looking for you and looking for. I bet you if someone dug enough into your reviewing projects, they could find a consistent thread across multiple reviews, potentially localizing and triangulating via wherever someone knows that you are, because someone can know where you train. They can be like, all right, what restaurants are maybe around this area, and what reviews look similar from place to place. That's how I'd go about it, actually, zeroing in on you.
I'm more worried about my reputation. Like I've convinced people I'm a nice guy now, so if they read my reviews, they might go, "Oh, this guy's an absolute douchebag."
Well, this actually might be an interesting thread to pull. Again, we can talk about whatever, but I often find that people will like leave comments on things, and the format of the comment will be something as follows. I normally like you and your stuff, but I have to disagree on this one. Or I normally like what you put out, but this is wrong. Or I normally like what you put out, but I couldn't think, any more differently than you. And, of course, the implication is like, I no longer like you because you've said something that I disagree with. And to me, when I hear, I tell this to my wife all the time now, it's like disagreement is my love language, because disagreement is, to disagree with someone that you care about, even if it's like through an online setting, is to speak your mind, and is to be honest. And I'm not sure like what a relationship is, whether it's like interpersonal or whether it's parasocial. Like I don't know, is it worth having a relationship without that ability to disagree, and without conflating disagreement with dislike? I don't know if you see that, or if you agree or disagree with that, but I've seen a lot of that recently, and I think it's a big part of what makes online discourse so hard, is that disagreement is conflated with like disgust and dislike.
I do have a lot of thoughts on this actually, because it's an area of interest of mine personally, just with communication in general. If we just stay with the YouTube comments for a second, what I get from that is I think that they're trying to provide validation for who they are. It's to give you an analogy. When I was a school teacher, if we had a student who was moved from somebody else's class to mine because they had been repeatedly naughty, they would be extra nice in my classroom, because it's almost like validation, like, hey, sir, look, I'm not crazy. Actually, they were crazy. I'm fine. And so when by saying that, look, I normally like your stuff, I think they're trying to say to you with open hands, not in a guilty way, look, I'm not crazy. I do normally, like you, but just to bring up a point, maybe they don't want to be classified as like just an out and out kind of hater. But that's just looking at it from a nice point of view. I have other thoughts when it comes to just general communication. I think now that I'm of the age that I am at, always say that, is
Ancient.
so old. Thanks, Ben. So, hate comments. I'm going to be on my alt accounts now. Ben, I probably like you, but what you said to Faz, so, yeah.
Wow, that would be a perfect clashing of concepts there, wouldn't it?
But like I'm saying, I think now that I'm older, I think I do appreciate friends who are able to call you out. I don't have many of them. And as you get older, you won't have many of them, because quite frankly, nobody's that bothered except for maybe your family, your wife. And it's important to have a partner, wife, whatever, who is able to call you on your bullshit. I think everyone needs something I say to my wife all the time. I forget the word that I use, but you need shit check. We both need to shit check each other, like myself and my wife, for ideas that I might have or whatever. And I think as you get older, you're less and less likely to have people like that in your life, because people have their own lives, they have their own kids, their jobs, and they have their own stresses. So they're not that bothered about that. So if you have somebody in your life who's able to do that and is willing to do that, that's actually quite valuable, as long as they're doing it genuinely.
Yeah, and this is somewhat tangential, but like when you get into like arguments with people, and you say stuff that maybe you don't mean, or that later on you see as distasteful, or anything similar, the tendency is to go back to that person and then to apologize, and then to view the apology as like the thing that is creating resolution and further progress. But to me, and that's where people tend to stop. Like, okay, we had this really big fight, disagreement. To me, stopping at sorry is like avoiding the actual good stuff, the actual substance, you know? And I feel like sorry is, of course, necessary because you're like, listen, you know, I don't know if you've seen the show The Bear, but this is what they in The Bear. This is what they do. This is an indication of sorry. Yeah, yeah. So if I say something that hurts your feelings, Faz, and you're still talking, I'd be like, oh, you know, this is, you know, it's on me. But I feel like, as is true with online discourse, sorry is like the beginning, and then the juice comes after that. You know, I don't think I have anything to apologize to you for just yet, but when I do, I will.
Hey, it's early days. So,
Yeah, it is early days. Yeah.
well, I think with that, I would say the real apology, I think, is in the continued change in behavior. So if you apologize for something that you've either been, you've said, you've done, I think real change, real apology comes with change as well. Like, have you learnt, or did you just make an off the cuff remark, not really thinking about the consequences, and are you likely to do that again? I mean, it's one of those things. You learn. I'm sure you've had relationships like this before, where you can't help certain people and the way they are and how they interact with others and how they interact with you. So ultimately, I don't like doing this, but at a certain point, you have to just exclude them from your life because they're not going to change, despite the apologies, despite the continued wanting to change. They can't. And it's a very sad thing because some people who are even close to you, blood related, as much as you might try, they're going to do what they're going to do. And in life, that's true for most people. You can't help people really, for the most part. I'm talking, you know, obviously training stuff we can, but I mean, just in terms of changing their personalities and their interactions and how they see you and how they value you, a lot of times you can't change people. They're going to do what they're going to do. Most of the time, you just have to allow people to be who they are. And then the goal is, over time, you create a life that you love. And with that, you have people who you love around you and spend time with you because they all share your values too. And I like to think that's where I'm at now. And that's part of why I'm so at peace with life now. So, but yeah, you can't change people, really.
Yeah, I like to think of it as like you want to get to a point in relationships that matter where two people can be themselves and say what they think without fear of abandonment or controversy that will lead to some kind of break in the relationship. I do think there's a lot to that idea of it's cliche to say like speaking your truth, you know, like that whole thing is a little bit cringy in any context which people are talking about it. But I do think that like that's how you get to a point in your life where you do feel secure, weirdly enough, is like you are just able to say what you're thinking. And I think for me, just remembering that as a simple mantra of like, okay, Ben, you're going to wake up and you're going to say to your wife what you're thinking and she's going to say what she thinks, and hopefully you can work out, you know, something that's a long-term solution to the ever-lasting problem of existential dread and anxiety.
It's so nice. Yeah, and entropy. It's so nice when you get it though, because everything is you can just be yourself. It takes work to have that kind of relationship where you can do that, but my God, it's so worth it. Like I dread to read comments that you read on like Reddit and stuff, like really incel comments where it's like I'll never find a woman, they're all the same and all that kind of stuff. And you know, it's there, it's out there. You can. It takes work though, a lot more work than people are willing to put in, especially these days. But it's possible. And I think part of the whole speaking your truth, I think, is also maybe being a bit more secure in yourself and knowing what your truth is, and not wanting to be something else for other people or to fill a role. And that comes like with a lot of experience. I think when I was younger, I wasn't the best at that. I thought I had to be a certain way, and this wasn't a conscious choice. I thought I had to be like, you know, the man, the provider, all that kind of stuff. And being the type of person I was, you know, big fast, you attract a certain type of woman and more independent kind of woman. But it's a lot of pressure, actually. So with the relationship I'm in now with my wife, been with her for a good long while now, it's much more equal, and it's a lot more relaxing for me inherently in that sense, because we are equal. I can speak my piece, she can speak hers. There's no pressure or anything, and just a lot happier in general with that. So yeah, I think part of that honesty, just knowing yourself too.
Yeah, performance is exhausting, and we had this brief exchange on Instagram about how neither one of us is particularly good or comfortable with small talk. So it is, so it is kind of funny to me that the first thing that we started naturally talking about was like this, It's a good representation. It's just exhausting, man. It's why I couldn't continue on with a full book of in person. That was like the primary impetus for me to move away from in-person training full time and toward education. Small talk was way too tiring for me. I would end up like feeling like I had just gotten hit by a truck. Meanwhile, I had just done a 1-hour session with like a girl that I just didn't really get along with, but had to pretend like I was. So that was a good lesson for me.
My brother's so bad at this, and he specifically learned football talk when we were younger, so he could just get by with small talk. And there was a there was a famous football transfer, a player called Andy Cole, he went for 7 million back in the day, and it was famous because it was just a lot of money, right? Now he held on to that statistic for like 6 years, past the point where players were getting sold for 14 million. He's like, so about that Andy Cole sale. Because he's like us, he has no small talk skills whatsoever. So that was pretty funny.
Yeah, let me just be clear for the listener, if we decide to even include this. Yeah. It's not that I'm bad at small talk. I can make the small talk. The small talk is just, if we're thinking about stimulus to fatigue, right? It's like that, super, super high fatigue for very little gain for me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I get you. I'm perfectly. I see you get it in the gym quite a lot. So I'm quite happy in the gym if I see a guy from across the way, like, yo, thumbs up, nod, headphones in. But some guys like the approach, and like it's I like it because it's nice to feel wanted, right? But
yeah.
But when they come up to you, it's that inevitable, long drawn out, very very fatiguing questions about what you're training today, how was your weekend. I'm hyped up on 700 milligrams of caffeine, and I can't think straight right now. So I'm not. I don't take caffeine, but still, like, yeah, it's very exhausting to have those conversations. I find them a lot more tiring than just riffing like this.
Well, there's a lot of effort, I find, as you probably know very well. Like, writing is incredibly high effort because it's like in real time you have to like slow down your thinking to a point that you can manage typing something that is intelligible to any degree. And I feel like in real time when that happens, when am forced to like slow down my thinking, I have to make a decision of like, if someone asks a relatively surface level question, how, like, at what level am I going to address this question? Am I going to just say like, I'm good, how are you? Or am I going to actually be truthful about, like this last couple of weeks I've been feeling this emotion and I think it's because of this. And, well, no one wants that, right? But at the same time, if I give the short answer, a lot of the times that's insufficient, So where am I supposed to land? Am I supposed to land with the small talk, with the long talk? The medium talk is exhausting to try to figure out as well. So it's just like, normally like you, I typically go with, in the gym, it's usually like a downward head nod. I'm like, something like that. Sometimes it's like a little, I like that one. Yeah, a little salute. What's up, brother? Maybe it's a fist bump, but that's about as far as I go.
With the answering, if someone says, how are you doing? I like the British sort of platitudes with that. So there's different levels. So if they say, how are you doing? All good. That's just like, everything is genuinely okay. The more descriptive you get about how good you're feeling, the worse life is, right? So,
okay, yeah, say more. Give me an example.
Yeah, all good, right? That's like things are basically okay. And if you say, they're going, things are bad. Like, we might be on the verge of divorce here. If you say, hey, living a dream, my God, he needs help right now.
Interesting.
Yeah, the longer the descriptor gets, the longer the answer gets, regardless of what it is, the worse off that guy is. But yeah, if it's just a quick, like, all good, brother, we're cool. Leave it as it is. But yeah, if he starts talking about living a dream, get him some help. Get him a whiskey.
Well, that seems like a good transition into me asking you about how your training is going.
But say living a dream. Training is going really well, actually, really well. It's been good. I've changed it up quite a lot this year. I've personally see. You know what it is, Ben. I don't like talking about my own training that much because it's not applicable to most people, and it's not applicable to how most people should train. But I train like a complete bro at the moment, mostly because kind of on autopilot with my own training. I go in, I do the thing. I'm mostly in maintenance now. I train 6 days a week, and the way that I train, it's very much my focus is much more on my business and my coaching, my wife, just other stuff in life. I've trained now for 26 years. I got very big, very strong.
That's a
Competed
long ass. That's a long ass time, dude.
long at time because people say, why don't you compete? It's like I'm over it. The last time I competed was 2018. I'm just you get to a point where you're over it, and I'm liking looking the way that I look now year round. And so training is and even diet is pretty much on autopilot now. I eat the same stuff. I mean, I've actually been trying to gain weight, but it means sitting down and adjusting my food portions, which is effort on my mind. So anyway, to answer your question, training's going great. 6 days a week at the moment, doing a bro split, very high volumes, lots of pyramids, reasonably heavy weights, fairly short rest period. Just keep moving during the gym. I like it. I get a good cardiovascular effect. Muscles get a good workout. I don't track anything anymore. So it's not, there are numerous gaps in the training. This would be great for maintenance, which it is. But I don't think, and it has other benefits, like other health benefits too. I don't do cardio because of how I train. But it's not what I'd recommend to anyone because it has any number of holes when it comes to progression. I mean, the topic of today is progression. If you're not tracking it, it becomes very difficult to really go all out. And the difference between progression versus stagnation is very, very small. So I'm going into these workouts knowing full well I'm not in the position in my life where I'm looking to progress anymore. So this is okay.
Yeah. So want follow up to that. I think it's really good for you to talk about your training with the context that you do, with the preface of this is what I'm doing. It's not necessarily what I would recommend for someone at this stage or this stage or this stage. And I feel like, given the recent sort of trend, I don't know if you agree or disagree with this, of the sort of lower volume approach. I've noticed more and more. So like the most recent example is Jeff Nippard made this whole video of the past 100 days, right? Blah blah blah. Anyone can watch it if they want. It's very well made, well edited video, I must say, as all of his videos are. But in terms of the actual takeaway message, I fear that fear is the wrong word, but I fear that many people in those beginner intermediate stages are hearing creators talk about how you don't need that much volume to progress. Low volumes are great. Low volumes work just as well as high volumes. And I think this is definitely something that you and I have talked about at some point, but like I don't think it makes a lot of sense for people in the sort of first phase of their training career to watch a Jeff Nippard video and then assume that they should do 4 sets a week, for their chest. I think that in large part, what has happened is a lot of people have built a lot of muscle using just the classic, like I'm just gonna put the kitchen sink, in my program here and just attack, and I'm just gonna learn from that process of attacking and doing. And just seeing where my thresholds are. Where do I start to get elbow pain? Where do I get hurt? Not that people are intending to do that, but like you as you push those boundaries so that you know where they are. And then from that point, from that big base that these people have built, then they're able to actually, through that process, learn how to train hard. Like, what does a hard set feel like? What does a quality setup feel like and look like? Learn how to stress themselves in fatigue under pressure without altering technique. And then, having built that base and having all that experience, these more experienced guys, like Jeff is obviously an advanced lifter, he can then pull back and do a fraction of the volume as he's losing weight and maintain, relatively speaking, the amount of muscle that he's built. And I fear that what people will do is they will look at that and they will say, oh, Jeff is doing low volume, I should do low volume. Not necessarily a question in there, but what do you think of all that? Do you have any points of like disagreement with that, or do you agree in general that beginners, intermediates should lean in the direction of doing more? Interested in your thoughts.
So I think that's a great point. First of all, the way that I describe volume requirements over the course of the lifter's lifetime, assuming they do reach advanced, is it's kind of a bell curve. I think in the beginning you can get away with a small amount, and then because it's new, you have the novelty factor. Now, as you get into the stage where you've been at the gym for maybe 3, 6 months, I think the level of volume you need dramatically goes up because you're not strong enough that you're able to, any one single set is able to exert that much of a stimulus onto your muscles. And you're not working hard enough yet because the ability to work hard is a skill you have to improve on over the course of many years. So you need more stimulus, but you're not lifting that heavy, you're not lifting that hard. And I say this on my channel all the time, and it always triggers like at least a couple of people in the audience. But if you're benching a plate and a half, like you don't know what heavy lifting, you don't know what hard lifting is. You just don't, because if you did, you wouldn't be benching a plate and a half. So you get this. Yeah, I'm sorry, but like reality, reality exists. So you get. I think the intermediates tend to need just more volume, and I'm.
All right, I'm good.
I am nothing if not honest. So, and I
Yeah.
think what happens is once you've exhausted those intermediate gains where you do ramp up a lot of volume, you can do. That's when, as a truly late stage intermediate or advanced lifter, that's when you can get away with a lot less because you can lift with more focus, more bias, and you're just lifting way heavier weights in general. So I think the advanced stage is a bit trickier though because you have to push something. You either have to push the weight with lower volumes, or there are certain circumstances where people can just reduce the weight on the bar, reduce the intensity, and compensate with more volume. I think if you are lighter joint bone like I am, there are potentials for that to be a better way to do things. But either way, low to high, and then when you're advanced, it can be a little bit messier, but usually lower. And Jeff, somebody like Jeff, who's built like Jeff, he's a shorter, stocky guy.
Very charitable way to put it.
Yeah, without offending anyone. I think he's got the type of bone structure where he could get away with much heavier lifting and much lower volume. So I agree with what you're saying. I don't think it's something. I think people shouldn't look at it and go, right, that's how I should train now. But then I think that's the same for everyone. I constantly fight back against people asking me, well, what are you doing for training class? It doesn't matter, like what I'm doing. Geez, but what you should do in the position where I was, where you are, when I was your age, when I was at your level of advancement, that's more applicable, and that's kind of what I cover in my books and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, this is a concept. I don't know if you have heard of the podcast called Modern Wisdom. The guy who hosts, his name is Chris Williamson.
Yeah.
I think he has a great podcast. He's a great interview if anyone's interested. But one of the things that he often talks about with his guests, because he interviews a lot of super competent people in their respective fields, is he'll ask them like, what did you do? What do you do not right now, but like, what did you do 10 years ago? What did you do 20 years ago? Because the listener, if they're in the same field, is probably not very, very unlikely in the position of the person being interviewed. So asking that degree of nuanced question of like, hey, Faz, not like, what did you do now? But like, when you were getting into lifting, like, what kinds of things did you do? And I mean, lifting is a lot less complicated in many ways than like specific fields, obviously, of study. Whereas like lifting will always be heavily, heavily subjectively influenced in terms of what people enjoy and how people respond. So I do feel like you just should go through that phase of figuring out like what the hell you even enjoy to begin with, and you should do enough so that you can kind of eat shit and figure out at what points and where specifically in your body you start to eat shit. I do think that the big upside of like information online now with fitness is that people have access to, on average, information that is more correct than not. But the biggest downside is the lack of is what is happening to curiosity and like self-experimentation, or at least seemingly so. So, that's all I had to say on that.
If I was to kind of bring it back to you, Ben, just whereabouts are you in your training? Because I look at your physique. You've shown some videos of yourself recently, and like the video you did had a thumbnail of your back. You look advanced, so looking big, dude. You look advanced. So, at what stage are you in lifting now? Are you at the stage where you're still making regular but slow progress, or do you feel like you're tapped out now? And then the second question off that is, what are you doing with your training now?
So, appreciate that. The first thing I would say is I am making more regular progress that is actually observable in the span of like a few months at a time in certain muscle groups that I have not paid a lot of attention to in many years prior. So like for me, that's basically biceps, triceps, middle delts, and forearms. Basically everything from here this way. I've been super prioritizing since the beginning of this year, put half an inch in my arms since the beginning of this year. Just taking circumference at basically the same body weight, same time of day, multiple measurements type thing. So I'm seeing progress in those areas. I'm seeing less, I'm seeing progress in terms of like strength slowly but surely in pretty much every other area. But the visual progression is, at what I would describe as like a kind of advanced type of progression where it's like, yeah, I can notice like my back is like a little bit bigger than it was last year if I look at pictures, but it's nothing that would be remotely close to the size that I put on from here down just because of the priority. I'm hoping that this stuff continues to grow given the amount of stuff that I'm doing for that now, which I think that it will. I've been again roughly around the same body weight. Oh, and the only other thing I would say is calves. I mean, calves are like among these other things too a big priority for me, and so I've seen a kind of similar I don't want to say growth spurt, but just trajectory in those as well. And so I think that's, I don't know, I think it's a useful lesson to learn, which is that like when we say someone is advanced or intermediate, that could be locally distinct depending on what body parts you're talking about, what exercises people have been doing. I have a client who from last year to this year in terms of like his lat development looks totally different, but in terms of other groups that he already had pretty well developed, not so much. So so that's kind of like what my growth trajectory has been like, and that has been slowing down as expected. And then just in terms of training, I'm pretty much keeping volumes, I would say, in the moderate-ish range for, moderate relative to what most people would describe as low, moderate, high. I'm pretty much keeping everything approximately moderate for most groups apart from the ones that I mentioned. Some even on the lower end of the range, like groups that I'm not super, that I don't care a ton about, like my hamstrings and my quads. I'm like happy with the size of my legs. I don't really care about getting them too much bigger. So it's like on a quad day, I might do 2 to 4 sets once a week, that kind of a thing, all sets to failure. And as I've mentioned to you before, I'm a big failure guy. I don't like not training to failure. As an example, through this arm growth process since the beginning of this year, I have also not tracked a single metric other than total sets. And so what my approach is I standardize a set amount throughout a week, and I do every set to failure. I don't even track load or reps. I don't count reps. I aim roughly in the 6 to 15 range and just kind of cross my fingers and hope for the best. But what is interesting is like, if I can look back at videos from the beginning of this year of like what I was doing for dumbbell preacher curls at a 60-degree angle, and I can know, okay, I think at the beginning of this year it was something like 35s or 40s pounds, freedom units, for maybe like 10-ish reps. And now for the same number of reps, I'm hitting like 45s or 50s for 10-ish, 10 plus. So, I can look at like those types of things and see over time, okay, even though the exercise selection is not the most standardized, I have standardized sets and I have standardized effort. And this maybe leads nicely into the rest of our discussion here about progression, which is that I absolutely would not recommend that someone who is in a beginner intermediate stage do that. I tracked, vigorously for a very long period of time. But at a certain point, I just said, I'm just going to see how this goes. Will I get stronger? Will I get bigger? Just standardizing effort and making sure that everything is at or close to failure. and it's been working out well. So I definitely don't think tracking is necessary. And I mean, you even mentioned that you're not currently doing that either. But I definitely think that if progression is a concern, then tracking and just being aware of what the objective metrics are is of utmost importance. So that's kind of where I'm currently at.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, a lot of interesting things to talk about from there. I'm trying to think what would be a good avenue to take it down to keep it relevant for the viewers. The failure argument, I think, is an important one. So I've always rallied against RAR approaches in general because I think it's appropriate. It's appropriateness. So intermediates, who are most of our audience, generally speaking, they need to work on the ability to work harder. And I think it's a learned skill. So by asking them to train at RAR of, say, 1 or 2, they may end up at 4 or 5. And that's, in my experience, regardless of what the research says, in my experience, that seems to be the way forward. So I think it's a nice, safe catch-all that for the majority of the audience, just try and do hard sets. Obviously, being sensible, squats are not to take it to failure on a regular basis because that would be a pain, even though I've seen people do that and it's very inspiring. For a beginner, I don't think it's necessary. Just do hard sets and you're good. But generally, anything after that, I think it's important. Then once you get to the level you're at and the level I'm at, I think there are ways of making training to failure work within the context of more moderate to lower volumes, and they're fine. I would say probably one of the biggest issues I've got with the modern day high volume context is the longer rest periods and the training everything to or close to failure. I think there are kind of issues with that, but that might be a conversation for a different day. But with regards to the progressive overload and tracking, with that, how much of us not tracking our lifts now is maybe a bit like previous calorie trackers not tracking and eating intuitively, but secretly having a full good idea of what's exactly on the plate? Because I don't track. Somebody said that to me the other day, and I was like, yeah, no, you're right. I know exactly what's on that plate. How much do you think is that? Because I'm aware of, I don't track, but I'm fully aware of the weights that I will hit on a range of exercises, even though, like you, I don't standardize my exercises.
Yeah, so a funny analogy that I think will resonate between you and I'm not sure how many other people, is like when you're playing World of Warcraft, right? And you're learning your keybinds, bro. I mean, like figuring out that shift 1 is akin to, disengage or something is like it takes however long it takes, but you consistently remember, okay, shift 1. Initially clicking the thing is easier. You just go and you scroll over and you click the button, but until you've really got the keybind down, you can't forget about it. But at a certain point, it's no longer in your brain. It's no longer shift 1. It's just, I want to disengage. Oh, that's where my fingers go. So I think that's a good enough analogy. I just couldn't help myself because it's you. But I know, totally agreed, and I totally think it relates to our earlier conversation about where are you at in your journey. And I think that if I had not gone through that such long, I mean, it was maybe like 3 or 4 years of just like everything was in a note, and like I could go back and I could look at it and scroll, and for you, I would assume it was even longer than that. But especially with powerlifting, like powerlifting was my introduction to lifting seriously. And so it's like tracking is the name of the game with powerlifting. Everything, literally every set is recorded. So I do think that was a big help to me. And I do think that it is easy to now say that, there isn't this focus on tracking, but much like the eating analogy, which I think is more well suited to this than the World of Warcraft analogy. I totally agree, and I do think that it is absolutely a necessary thing if lifters want to get to a point where things are more intuitive. And I do think that just the final point here is that given that my exercise selection is not like super standardized, there is, I think, a separate conversation to be had about like, it's helpful to get to a point where tracking is intuitive, but I also think understanding, exercise quality as a separate category to become intuitive in is also equally as important, because I could do like a prime chest supported row and go over to a life fitness chest supported row, and if they're similar enough, it's like, okay, that's checking that box. There's basically no learning curve from one machine to the next. But I could imagine a scenario where someone really is good with all the tracking stuff, but not so good with the exercise quality stuff. And so it really just depends on like what is the bottleneck for the person. And I think that so much of it does just come down to those two things: is exercise quality, and are you tracking that quality over time. I have a question for you, if that's okay, unless you wanted to respond to anything quickly.
One thing I'll briefly say before your question is, with regards to the point about quality, I think that's a great point. I see it a lot here in the UK because there is this focus on progressive overload, adding more weight to the bar. One thing that I've had a lot of success with, which I spoke about recently on my channel, is standardizing progression so it's once a month rather than doing a double progression. So moving people away from double progression and just saying, right, add the smallest increment you can once a month. And what I found is it has had the effect of improving the quality of the exercises, like you mentioned, because yeah.
Can you give a concrete example just so that people can?
So, for example, let's say you're doing a bench press. Like the set scheme might be 4 sets of 6, something like that, 5 to 6. Now, I'm happy for you to add weight for the reps to drop. Then for the course of that month, for you to add repetitions up to the range. Now, you may well get to the top of the range midway through week 2. So you have a week and a half where you're just staying at the top of the range. You're doing the same reps. You're not adding reps anymore because you've got your target, but the reps are feeling better. You're able to better connect with your chest. You're able to be smoother on the way down, more explosive on the way up. And just in general, it feels like you're targeting your chest a lot more. I found the exercise quality to have great improvements within that because you take the pressure off the client and you move away from double progression altogether. Like I had a client check in this morning who was saying for the first time ever, he actually is starting to feel his muscle work with regards to his training, whereas previously he never could. He gets better pump now. He gets better disruption in the muscle. And all of that has come from because we've taken the pressure off poundage progression.
Yeah. So it's kind of like you are taking the focus away from metric and into subjective experience, and as a consequence of that directionality, what you're doing is you're almost forcing people to pay more attention to the thing that they were not paying attention to before.
Yeah, and I don't think there's anything particularly magical about either the form or the poundage progression. You need both. But I think people are a little bit too concerned with one and need to be more concerned with form. Certainly from what I've seen, red-blooded males want to get more weight on the bar. It's typically not a problem that I have with female clients. So.
Yeah, that distinction is interesting as well because I share that experience.
Yeah.
The thing that I was gonna ask you about is like when we're thinking about progression and like tracking or lack thereof. I just in my own experience, I don't like meet people who are really serious about good specific techniques and hard training that have these kinds of questions about like plateaus and not progressing. Okay, so first of all, do you have that shared experience? Like, are the people who you meet who are really serious about super strict technique, but also super high effort, high load? Like, are those people that you meet, are they ever talking about plateaus? Are they ever talking about problems with progression, or no?
They're not reaching out for coaching generally unless it's for contest prep. So I think you've got a range of lifting personalities. I have this theory about lifting personalities because I think if you watch a person through, say, 2 sets, you can tell pretty much what their form is going to be like for most things they do. I think because you have lifting personalities. You've got the guy, the overly cautious lifter. He needs perfect form, otherwise he's just not going to add weight to the bar. He's the timid lifter. And on the other side, which is like the, what do they call it? The technique cyborg, right? And then on the other side,
Renaissance periodization. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like a really exaggerated version of their worst ones, right? Now, on the other side, you've got the berserker. And there's a few of these who I've seen at the gym that I go to. They're just usually young guys, very, very big, very robust, scream and shout a lot, and just go absolutely maniac. Now, typically speaking, having the best of both worlds, being able to go berserk under control, is the mark of a good lifter, and it's probably going to mean you're not going to get so much of a plateau. You're not going to achieve those plateaus. You're not going to see those plateaus. Like when I do a consultation with a client, or if I'm evaluating a new client, I'm looking for ways that I can add value to what they're currently doing. So generally, they're going to fit into one of those camps. If they do that, a lot of times things kind of fix themselves. So yeah, yeah. To answer your question, it's a skill, and you rarely see both needing help because they're usually just doing the thing.
Yeah, and with the berserker sort of archetype, the funniest thing about it is I rarely, because I'm picturing a couple guys that go to my gym that I see do this every 5 days a week, where they have this like all out set within which there's no slowing of rep speed at any point in the set, which I find totally puzzling. Like I just can't relate to like a set being hard without the set slowing down. You know what I mean? So I do think that marrying those two worlds is great. Is like you have someone who's like just a sort of controlled aggression, which is kind of how I like to do my own sets, is with a controlled aggression. But so then in terms of like major issues, like what do you even, I remember I was going to ask you, what do you even think people mean when they say I'm plateaued? Because I'll get messages about this every single day. Like, I'm plateaued, what should I do? And just before you give your 2 cents, my first question is always like, on what timeline are we even talking about? Number one. And then number two, are you tracking things? And in my experience, people are not tracking, and people are usually talking about a timeline that is 2 weeks or fewer, to which my response in many cases is we need to broaden the time horizon within which we use that term plateau. But question for you to make it super concrete is like, what do you think people mean by plateau, generally speaking, in your experience? And what do you think are the most common causes, if we even accept that definition at face value?
So yeah, I've got an answer for that, but I've also got a scenario to place to you for the next part of your question as well.
Okay.
Pull it back to you with a question. So I think genuinely, yeah, I see people look at things in too short of a context because they're coming from their beginner gains, expecting more progression than they should be at this stage, and as a result, they're getting antsy. They may be changing things. They're looking at advice. They've probably tried something already before they've come to you that hasn't worked because they've had to back cycle maybe a new routine. So yeah, I think people need to zoom out. But here's a scenario for you, right? You've got a client. He benches a plate and a half for sets of 6, okay? And he's like a regular general trainer. He also squats and deadlifts. So his squat is about a plate and a half for 6. Deadlift is just a little bit over that. And he's saying, look, my bench just isn't moving, hasn't been moving for months. What do I do? Like, where am I going wrong? Like, my mind goes to something very specific there. What are you thinking?
So let me just make sure I understand the scenario clearly here. Someone is stalled on progression on the bench press, mm-hmm. and they're using a plate and a half. Let's call it 185 for sets of 6.
Yep.
And they're doing something like 4 sets of 6.
Yeah, sure.
On average, okay.
Yeah.
And they're suggesting that they can't add weight over what amount of time? Have they defined the time horizon?
Oh, they've just said it's been weeks. They don't really know.
Okay. Well, I would have...
The squat is flying at about the same weight. So is the deadlift, just a little bit higher.
So the squat is progressing, the deadlift is progressing, and the bench is not. Well, the first question I would probably have to ask is, I would have to ask to see a timeline of numbers within the last several months. That's the first thing that I would ask.
Yeah.
Now, the second thing that I would ask, and maybe I would even ask this first, is I would ask for videos of the bench press. I find that per exercise, the rate limiter to adding more load or doing more reps is most often technique. I don't find generally that when technique is standardized and effort is high, that people have trouble adding load. So the bench just might look like garbage. And those are the first 2 things that I would think of, would be the technique and the prior stats. I would also maybe just ask like whether or not they have even attempted to alter their exercise selection, what other exercises for chest they're doing. I would also maybe consider the fact that, bench press, unlike squats and deadlifts, tends to be rate limited for many people, in my experience, because of just the absolute size of their chest and their triceps and their front delts. Whereas squats and deadlifts, like especially with prior athletes, most people have relatively like developed legs if they've been doing any activity whatsoever. But besides that, nothing else really jumps out to me. I'm curious as to what was jumping out for you.
I think they're all relevant. Everything you said there is relevant. But I think the initial problem that I would look at is saying, well, why is your squat exactly the same as your bench? Like, that's a big issue. And also your squat's flying. Your squat's flying, which indicates to me generally what happens is this person hasn't been particularly consistent with squatting or deadlifting. The squat is absolutely flying. And it's very, very common for that to happen. The squat might overtake the bench in the time I work with them by 20, 30 kilos. But the bench is still slowing down. Now, I would say it's a result of everything you've said. I think at that stage, the bench is relatively further ahead because generally speaking, you're going to have less poundage potential with your bench press than you will with your squat and your deadlift. And as a result, they just need to entirely take everything up a notch. They might need to gain more overall size. They might need to improve their food quality. They might need to improve their sleep. They might need to improve their training intensity. Just generally their understanding of exercise and effort and everything might need to go up. But I think it's a very clear sign for me when somebody has a relatively, compared to their squat and deadlift, advanced bench, and it's stalling out, and then everything else is flying up. Like, well, why, if that's flying up, why are we seeing so much progress in that now? Yeah, I'd love to take all the credit for it, but clearly it's because you were sandbagging on it before. So I just tend to find guys who come to me with a much more balanced strength profile. Again, they usually are guys who know how to work hard, and they're able to put out in the gym. Guys who come to me with stronger bench, relatively speaking, about the same level as a squat, it's always the case where they've been incredibly inconsistent with their squats and deadlifts, and they work harder on the bench. Because let's face it, the bench is easier exercise. You're lying down, you're pushing. It's not as inherently difficult as a squat or deadlift, and a lot of people just aren't about that life initially when they start lifting. So that's the first thing. But I think everything you said is relevant in terms of how you would fix the plateaus. But that first thing is the question I would say is, look, why are we sandbagging in general? We might take it up a notch.
Yeah, I do find also that like what can be rate limiting in people's squats and deadlifts is, I don't want to say it's really a technique issue, but like so much of the rate limiter for squats and deadlifts is less to do with leg related output and more to do with spine related output. And I do feel as though, like, if you look at any really high level powerlifter, as you know, these are people who have like what looks like another organism, like on their lower backs, and I just feel like getting your spine stronger is also something that's really unpleasant to do in general, because it kind of fucks up the rest of your day and potentially the rest of your week. But I think that's a really good point that you made, and I've never personally resonated with the concept of like trying hard on one specific lift and not trying hard on another. I was always someone who was like equally interested in doing all things. So that's a good insight for me, because I hadn't thought about it and I haven't personally experienced it. And strangely, I haven't worked with someone who had that discrepancy in motivation. Like, there was a time period where I was working with like 30 different online clients who were all powerlifting focused, and strangely not one of them had that discrepancy in focus. I don't know why. I can't explain that, but thinking about it now, with the point that you brought up, it's probably more common than not on average, people pursuing the gym. Let me ask you a follow-up then. Do you see a parallel between what you just described and like hypertrophy training equivalents? Like, are there trends that you see in upper versus lower body, or is it more particular to the muscle group? So for instance, someone could prioritize their chest and not give two shits about their back or their arms, or do you see a consistent thread in any sort of similar way?
Yeah, I think it's almost the opposite for powerlifters and for because when I was coming up as a powerlifter, Like my bench sucked, and my squat and deadlift were, a lot higher, similar to, the clients you're mentioning. And what they used to tell us, the old guys on the forums would always say, don't let a bodybuilder out bench you. And it was always because they do more work on it. They do
Yeah.
more work, they practice more, they build a bigger upper body. Because I think something you said earlier, and I agree with, is the bench is more likely to be rate limited by your muscle size. And certainly for me, I only ever benched something like 330, weighing 180. Like to bench 400, I had to go right the way up to 200 pounds. Like there was no chance of doing that at 180. So I had a reasonable bench at 180, but and most of that additional 20 pounds was right across here. So yeah, I think it's almost the opposite for bodybuilders. Bodybuilders generally, you're going to find most people are doing more with the upper body. I mean, I find that just casually with people I train with. I don't understand it. Like you, I don't get it. I just want to train everything all the time. But there's a marked coincidence with days off where they're busy or their kids need attention and leg day. That's
Yeah, yeah,
what I'm saying. If my workout partners are listening, I apologize, guys, but it's true. So the absence rates, if I was a school teacher, the absence rates are worrying. This is where we might call the council and say, look, we need to have a phone call home. So,
yeah, 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 yeah. One other thing that just came to mind, which may be relevant to some, because I do want to keep sort of beating this dead horse of progression. I do think that a lot of progression related issues to me can also just come down to like really not good exercise setups and like exercise selections. I think that exercise selection plays, especially for people who kind of sort of know how to push but have an awkward time doing it. I think exercise selection plays a big role. And I think that there are certain motions that are just more difficult to progress as a consequence of their physics. So for example, like if you picture like a dumbbell reverse fly, for example. Let's just say it's bilateral, dumbbell, bend over, reverse fly. If you pick an exercise like that relative to a reverse fly on a machine, right? There are some there are some substantial differences. Like the first and most obvious is the degree of stability within the actual machine. The machine is constrained to the same arc as your arm, and so the motion might just feel better. It might be more specifically loaded throughout the entirety of the range. But also, if you go from like a dumbbell reverse fly to using the prime reverse fly machine where you can adjust the resistance profile, you can make it super, super heavy where you are in a stronger position and lighter where you're not. And so there may be like a situation where someone could just be doing an exercise where the resistance profile is so mismatched to your strength that they're just using an amount of load and expecting a load progression with that variation that is totally out of line with what that variation would allow for. So like just for people listening, like if you're doing like a reverse fly with a dumbbell, it's going to be super, super heavy when your arm is like up and back out here, and it's going to be like there's almost no or minimal tension toward the bottom end of the range. And so you can get to a point where you could maybe do the entire range, let's just pick a number, 20 pounds, but if you use the weight that was appropriate for the first half of the range, maybe you could double that or something, something like that. And so just that kind of inconsistency in loading throughout a range of motion relative to a muscle's strength, I find can be very puzzling for a lot of people, because they can increase the weight and do maybe 80% of the range, or they can keep the weight super, super light and only heavy where there's tension, and maybe just use that as what they're trying to progress. So I just think that exercise selection and like loading parameters like that can make a difference, as stability obviously can as well, if stability is more of a rate limiter. I'm not sure if you had any thoughts on that or experiences with that as it relates to specific variations, but it's just something that came to mind.
yeah, I think with dumbbells inherently, especially exercises like side raises or rear raises, they get very difficult very quickly. And I think people expect to see progression in them when the reality is, over the course of your lifting lifetime, you're probably not going to be handling more than say the 20, the kilos dumbbells on your side raises. Like I think that's what I handled at my strongest. And I mean, if you're currently handling say the 12 kilo dumbbells, like you're not expecting monthly progression on that stuff because it gets very difficult very, very quickly. So I think with that kind of stuff, I will speak to my clients and just say, look, maybe just improve your performance, maybe get some more reps, but don't think too hard about monthly progression or even 2 months, maybe 3 months, because ultimately speaking, how strong are you really going to get on those things? So yeah, I think with that kind of stuff, with dumbbells, that's a problem. The other side of the problem with dumbbells that I'm not a huge fan of is just stability and getting them into position. Like I had to stop dumbbell benches when I had pressed the 70s, which is like 154 pounds. Like at that stage, I should have stopped doing those probably about 50 pounds prior because it's just a circus stunt at that point. You have to get the gym owner to come over and help me stabilize my arms, otherwise I'm going to rip something out of the socket. It's pointless. So nowadays, I generally don't. There are certain lifts which I stop clients doing at a certain point because it's too demanding on the body to either set up or just in general. Like dumbbell benches past about 100-pound dumbbells, I just don't bother anymore. Get on a good machine if we have good alternatives. Same with full deadlifts. I very rarely have clients doing those over say 4 plates a side. Once you get to about 3.5, it becomes an event in itself, and you're much better off. It's much more efficient to pick just a strict hip hinge like an RDL or a stiff leg deadlift or even a deficit deadlift for the very strong guys. So yeah, I think exercise selection is definitely a factor which I think we could talk about.
Yeah, I also think this is going to sound really lazy, but overall, if I'm doing like 5 exercises in a workout, if all 5 of them are free weight or plate loaded, man, forget about it. I mean, plate loaded is asking a lot if you're gonna slap on like 4 or 5 plates onto a machine, especially like a lower body machine, which is like it does sound kind of silly, but like at the extremes, it is a cost that then needs to be managed, right? So like I've trained with bodybuilders who are using like 12 plates a side on leg press and or hack squat. And it's like the cost of them having to lift plates on and off that machine could be something that is legitimately adding to some kind of like overall volume related to like spinal erector fatigue. If that person has back issues, right, and they are that strong, that is something else that needs to be considered. So I do think those kinds of things are obviously more minor compared to what we were talking about earlier. But I do think that at a certain point, lifters start to need to pay attention to those things, if not only for like enjoyment and sustainability's sake.
Yeah, I think there's another side to that as well. It's not just the stability component and the getting into position, but just if you are that strong, I think there's a cost of going up in weight on that exercise. You may want to pick something which is more specific to what you're trying to build. Like if you are able to hack squat with that many plates aside, we may need to get more specific, add pauses or whatever to reduce the load. I'll give you an example. So I talked about this in a video which is out in a couple of weeks' time. When I was a powerlifter, I was coached by one of Britain's best powerlifters, a guy called Tom Martin, and I would go up and try and train with him every now and again. And so we'd do a deadlift session. So we'd go up in weight, we'd use different bars because, as will be evident shortly, 1 plate, 2 plate, 3 plate, 4 plate, doing stiff leg deadlifts, sets of 8. I would get to 5 plates and I would do my sets at 5 plates, 3 sets, because I was able to do a reasonable amount of volume without beating myself up. Tom would go up, so 5 plates is 220 kilos. Tom would then go up to 260 kilos and 300 kilos and then 340 kilos, which is just over 700 pounds, like 750 pounds. And he would do his top set there. Now, he did not do multiple sets. He did that 1 set. And so I think there is still, if you're that ridiculously strong like he was, there is still a cost of going up in weight on these exercises. Now, obviously, he had to do it. And we were doing stiff leg deadlifts. We weren't doing regular deadlifts just to reduce the poundage as much as we could. But at that stage, there is still a cost. So if you're a bodybuilder, you don't need to go down that road. I think there's another cost with the greater point we're talking about here on exercise selection. I think you can be that much more specific when you are that big to be able to target the muscle more and reduce the overall recovery demands on your body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also do wonder at that point, like if someone isn't if someone doesn't have a hyper specific goal in powerlifting too, I do think that like over time specializing to more like isolated movements, I think like this is the reason that bodybuilders trend in the direction they do, especially as they get stronger. It's just like it's just not sustainable to load up the bar to that degree. And as silly as it may seem to some people, like doing a hip thrust, where you can just add a couple plates to a machine and like just thrash your glutes without very much other associated fatigue, like that stuff just becomes more and more and more relevant. But I do think that people tend to figure that out for themselves when they start to just bump into hard objects as they get stronger.
I think for some cases there are some exceptions, which build, like I think heavy hinges from the floor do build a type of thickness which is quite difficult to mimic in other ways. But when I see guys loading up the hack squat with knee wraps and the belt and the band with like 8 plates or something ridiculous like that, doing less than a range of motion they should be working with, I question the value of it. I think, are we doing this for ego at this point, or would we be better off with lightening the load, maybe adding a pause and taking the wraps off? So
yeah, well, I think about the opposite end of the extreme, although it's kind of very similar, is the new sort of style where people are like cuffing everything above their elbow and using it for pulls and presses and stuff, where they're moving like 2 inches and their shoulders going all over the place. That's like the same problem for a very different reason, And I see this in my gym, and it's like it's not something I'm just seeing on TikTok now. It's something I'm seeing in the gym. I'm seeing people. I saw this dude the other day shit talking the Prime reverse fly machine because he clearly couldn't figure out how to use it. He was using way too much load relative to his skill, and then of course blamed the machine for the problem with the exercise. And I think that's a good lesson to sort of also loop back to what we were talking about earlier, which is just like I don't know, man, like this idea of experimenting and figuring stuff out. Like you just in that situation, if you have an experimental mindset, you might think to yourself, maybe I should like just grab the handles like 99% of other people do and like use a lighter weight. Let's like see how that goes, So I hope to see more of that moving forward. But I think people need to work through it themselves, and if they enjoy training that way, then fine. But I'm not seeing very many people make a lot of progress doing that at this particular moment.
I saw one guy at the gym that I go to do. He strapped his elbow in for standing pull downs, and so it has crossed the pond. We are.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I was tempted to go up to him and say, no, not on my watch, though. But I didn't. But no. What I wanted to say was, so I've been doing a lot of pyramid training recently, where I'll start with reps which are way higher than I would normally work with. So let's say a set of 20. Now, I think there's quite a lot of value in experimenting with different rep ranges because of the reasons we're talking about. Less load, you can still make it challenging. And for a few exercises, reducing the load can completely alter how the exercise feels for you and where you feel it. Like I know, for example, for me, with chest work, I tend to feel a lot more chest during chest pressing if the reps are higher and the weight is lighter. The heavier it gets, the closer I am to a 1 rep max or a 5 rep max, the more triceps and elbows are involved. And I did see a study once which supported that. They tested the percentage of a 1 rep max for the bench, and as the percentage got higher, there was more tricep recruitment and less relative chest recruitment. So I think there's a thing. Squats are another example. For a lot of people, as the weight gets heavier, they're more likely to back the weight up and it be a lower back lift. So I think something that is slept on when it comes to form, and as like you were saying earlier, exercise selection, is repetition ranges. I think you can completely change how an exercise feels by just increasing the reps or changing the reps at least. Similar to your Rationale example, if that lad had maybe doubled his reps or even quadrupled his reps, because no doubt he may have been trying 5s.
Bro, he was doing like 4s or 3s, man.
There you go, man. So if he'd gone to 20s, it probably would have felt like a completely different exercise. And I think so that's something. And I've been having a lot of success with that recently, doing even up to 30 reps for leg sessions, like with a leg press, short range leg press. So not so much a hack squat, because then you're more cardiovascular limited, but with a leg press, doing up to 30s actually works really well for the first set, and then pyramiding down 25s, 20s. Leg extensions don't work as well because the burn is prohibitive. Squats structurally is difficult, but for the leg press, it's really well suited to those high reps, and it feels very different. I don't generally like the feeling of a leg press when I'm doing a heavy set of 8. It just feels like too much on the knees. So for me, this is working out very well.
I have a ton of thoughts on that. I'm going to pee my brains out, so I'm going to do that, and then I will respond because it is becoming increasingly hard to concentrate.
Go for it. I can edit it out.
All right, that was amazing.
I wanted to point out for the audience, that was just Ben's plumbing. That wasn't the sound of him actually weeing. There's just a lot of water running there.
Oh, yeah, you sure about that?
Yeah.
How could you know?
It felt like a scene from, you remember Naked Gun where he accidentally takes his microphone into the toilet?
Dude, my pee was just crystal clear just now. It's crystal freaking clear.
Gonna hydrate. Yeah.
Okay, so... Yeah, more coffee. That'll help. So I think it stands to reason that at the simplest possible level, like you gave it the example of like the chest press stuff feeling better with higher reps. At the simplest level, like muscles can only, lift what they can lift. So if you lift a certain amount for your chest, and that's good for your chest, but then you increase the load more so that your chest can no longer lift that amount for that amount of reps, then you're going to need some help from something else. In the same way you described, like, people kicking their hips back in a squat, the reason they do that is to share the load between the knees and the hips, because the knees presumably can't handle whatever the load is. So I feel like using more reps as a strategy is an easy way to navigate that problem in a way that is kind of foolproof, where you're just using an amount of load that you definitely know that you can control with the target tissue. But I would also say that, like, on the other side of things, rate limiters can really drastically change. So like if you're doing, sets of 4 on like triceps extension and like you can't keep your shoulder still, the rate limiting strength of that motion may be, your rear delt. They're just trying to basically hold your arm back if you're doing it out here or something like that. Whereas if you do, sets of 15 or 20 or something, then that's obviously, it's easier for you to just hold your shoulder there. I'd also say like machines and free weights and the distinctions between those two things can make a big difference, because if you're talking about like a barbell chest press, for example, or a machine chest press, the fact that your hand is fixed is what allows you to actually crank the bar up with your triceps. You can use your triceps to a greater extent. But imagine you're doing like a cable press or dumbbell press, or a cable press would be a good example, because you could have the cable like outside of your elbow, right, where it is literally creating a moment that involves your biceps, because just for the listeners, it's literally outside of your elbow. It would have to be going over this way for you to be using your triceps. So you could literally just eliminate any possibility of triceps by changing the resistance and the resistance direction. Of course, you trade off for biceps that way, but it's not like anyone doing a chest press is going to be doing this. Like no one's going to start to just curl the weight up, in that direction. So this is like, it's cool how this also connects to the original, idea of just exercise selection, and how exercise selection and rep ranges are, like, in many cases very intimately connected, which is to say that, like, the rep range, I always think that like the rep range you should use should be specific to the exercise. So when people say like, do you do high reps or low reps? You know, you mentioned sets of 30 on leg press. You know, if someone's doing sets of 5 on leg press, maybe their back is like the thing that feels like shit. Maybe as soon as they unrack, it's like just the compression into the pad and the discomfort of the pad becomes a problem. So the rate limiter can completely shift with the same exact exercise, to your points, with different rep ranges. And I feel like for me, I decide rep range based on the exercise. I don't decide rep range beforehand and then try to fit a square peg into a round hole.
No, absolutely. I think one more thing to say in addition to what you've said, and what we've said, is I think generally speaking, you're better able to direct the stress where you want it to go if the weight is lighter, because each of those muscles that are involved in the chain is less of a limiter, so you can kind of focus what you're doing. So there's that too. And generally, like now when I'm doing higher repetitions, a lot of that is because of joints not being as strong as they used to be, or muscles being relatively stronger than my joints. So it allows me to really stress the muscle the way that I want to stress it, which is another advantage. As a general rule, just increasing the repetitions, you put up with a different type of pain. You put up with the pain of more burn and just generally going through those reps, but you alleviate some joint pain, which is quite useful for your exercise form.
Yeah, and I do feel like that is something that becomes increasingly more important as people as people. Hi, sorry, Fez. Hi, sorry, I'm on a work call. Is everything okay?
We're here to flush the system. Is it okay if we come in?
Oh yeah, great. Are you okay if I just close this door?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you so much. Sorry about that.
No, no problem.
They're very friendly.
It's no problem. I didn't want to let him off the door.
Thanks for your help.
You're welcome.
Fuck, sorry, dude.
It's all right.
I want to explain this, but it would take too long to explain. Yeah, no, I just feel like eventually, like, as I'm sure you can relate, the priority just becomes not getting fucking hurt.
Yeah.
And progression at a certain point is like the thing that is kind of, I don't know, secondary to just staying healthy, because being healthy is the sort of bedrock on top of which you can build anything meaningful.
One more thing I'll add to that is speed of the exercise too, speed of the movement, speed of the rep. So what I find, something I've been struggling with recently with clients is RDLs and people just dive bombing them. So I think what can happen at the end range of an exercise when you dive bomb into it is your body's natural stretch reflex kicks in and there's just a lack of control coming out of the hole. Now, you do that in a squat. I think you've got to be a very highly trained Olympic athlete to be able to bounce out of a squat in the correct position that you went down in. Same with an RDL. What I tend to find is people just stiffen up way too quickly. The back, you create range of motion at the lower back rather than where you should be, which is more at the hips, because things are just moving too fast. You can't really see what's going on. You can't figure things out. You can't slow things down. In a leg press, it's the lower back which tends to go. So what I tend to find is reasonably good advice for the most part. Just slow things down a little bit on the eccentrics, so you've got the time to think about what your body position should be doing. Because really, if you think about it, lifting weights is an unusual activity in the sense that some parts of your body have to remain still while other parts have to move, and you have to be conscious of that while you're putting out maximum effort. There aren't many sports where that happens. I mean, imagine playing tennis, everything moves, or even sprinting to a certain extent, everything's moving. Whereas with lifting, it's a very specific part of your body which is moving, while it's generally acknowledged everything else should remain braced and still and as sturdy as possible. So none of us, well, I'm certainly not that talented where I can dive bomb my squats. I never was able to do that. Or really bring down my bench press in a very, very fast sort of pace. Whenever I did my heaviest bench press, they were very, very slow, kind of like stand effording, super slow on the way down. And then I was able to do what I could on the way up. So I think speed can also influence what we're talking about, including exercise selection, repetition ranges, and even resistance profiles like you've touched on.
Yeah, first of all, sorry if there's any background noise. Hopefully in the post this will be somewhat the water situation is the water situation. So yeah, I totally agree, and I think one of the things I always say to people who I'm training with is like the hardest thing for you is not going to be moving; it's going to be not moving. Because I mean, it's kind of, it sounds really stupid to say, but like motion can only exist in a scenario where there is relative stillness and relative activity. So like for me to bend my elbow, this thing needs to be still. If multiple things are moving, I can still bend my elbow. But even in the context of like looking at the elbow joint, one of those things is moving at a certain point and one of those isn't. And to the point about the RDL or the squatting and the dive bombing, yeah, tempo for sure makes a humongous difference. And in that instance, it's kind of like what you're doing by dive bombing is you're decreasing the force that otherwise would have been taken up on the way down, and you're just smushing it all to this very tiny window. Right. And I think to your point that like increasing that amount of time that you have to actually think about the motion is something that can completely change a rate limiter beyond, the rate limiters that you're trying to create. And so I think that like all these things collectively paint a really hopefully helpful picture for people, which is like, okay, if you're struggling with progress, it could be it could be like the effort and the setup and the standardization, the lack of tracking, but it could also be maybe you're using an inappropriate rep range for the exercise that you're trying to do. Maybe you're using a tempo that doesn't allow you to actually train the thing you want to train. Maybe you're using a technique that just forces other non-target muscles to work more than the target muscle. It could be so many different things, and I feel like something that could be a reliable takeaway for people is to constantly attempt to experiment, not with the approach of like doing something random, but with an approach of like adjusting one thing at a time. Like you have all these different variables. You have the tempo, you have the range of motion, you have the arm path or the leg path, you have the rep range. Just pick like one variable. If something really isn't working out for you, pick one variable and just see how tweaking that one variable changes something. And oftentimes when you tweak one thing, multiple things will change anyway. So like if you go from low reps to high reps or the inverse, something is going to change probably that you're not even aware of. So make one change at a time, troubleshoot with that change and see how it goes over, sustained periods. Don't make a change and be like, oh, well, this sucks. I didn't, do this in this session, immediately. See how that change lasts and how it actually progresses or doesn't over subsequent weeks. And then over time, what you end up with is you just end up with a bunch of exercises, all of which you have kind of customized and made your own over long periods of time, which are kind of foolproof in the sense that you can always make reliable progress on those exercises or exercises that are close enough to the ones that you're doing. Where you don't, progress isn't really something that you have to be overly concerned about, and you arrive at a point where you have this arsenal of exercises you love, you know how to put effort into them reliably without getting hurt, and you can just focus on other things, like what you're listening to or like who you're hanging around with. So that was kind of my like summary, but I'm interested to see if you have anything to add.
I think this is a great segment, by the way, just as a side note, because I think what we're doing is what a good coach should do is systematize what can appear to be complex and chaotic things that we do with factors which we aren't always aware of. So like, oh, that was bad form, that was too aggressive. Like, well, let's just break it down. What are we specifically talking about? And I think like a good coach as well as a good teacher, what you're trying to do is systematize complex topics which might appear to be more art than science. But actually, if you break things down enough, you can systematize them and they become a lot less like art. They become a lot more like science and a lot more of a system. So I love that. And what I was thinking about doing was just tying it back to the point we had at the beginning, which is intensity and form. And I want to do that via the form of an anecdote. I've got a client of mine who's been working with me for a good few months now. Older guy, and when he first started with me, he had never really lifted a weight before. So we were starting right from scratch, and because he was an older guy, professional guy, corporate guy, he wasn't really that used to pushing himself in the gym because that's not his thing. He was never really been a physical guy. So one of the first things we worked on was just his lifting intensity. Now, Mike, God bless him, love the guy, but he's not that great at lifting videos either, so he doesn't send me many videos. So he sent me videos today, and I was like, yes, got some videos. And it's been a month or two. I've been hounding him for videos. So he's like, right, got the videos you wanted. And I know he's been working on his intensity because we've been talking about it a lot, and he's really on board with it. Now, he sent me the videos and he's lifting like an absolute demon. Like, I love the aggression, love the intensity. I'm like, yes, I was getting fired up just watching. I thought, this is fantastic. Like, Mike, you've got it. And I said, look, now we want to reach the final evolution, which is lifting with intensity, but also focus on the form, the cadence, and all the things that we've been talking about. So now my project is, over the course of the next few months, to systematize those things so that he can lift with aggression and intensity. Because I think at the moment, there is this paradox with him. Like, right, I'm lifting intense, but now I've got to fix my form. How do I fix my form while still lifting intensely? And I think if we break things down in the way that you and I are doing, we look at the different factors, like, right, let's look at speed. Let's look at form. Let's look at the exercise selection. Look at the repetition range. Then we can start to land on the point where we are working hard, but we have those other more tangible factors in check as well. So I think this has been an awesome section for systematizing what might appear to be quite chaotic concepts.
Yeah, no, that's a really good way to.
Pat yourself on the back.
Yeah, hell yeah, dude. No, I think that transition from like aggression, like pure aggression, to like controlled aggression is the most difficult step for people to take, because the contained aggression is actually a lot more mentally challenging. I think a lot of people are under the impression that kind of like attacking the weight style of lifting is the most like hardcore. I'm more inclined to think that like when you see a fucking big dude or big girl like lifting heavy, just like every inch of the rep is controlled. You can tell they're fully in their bodies. They're not thinking about anything. They're just, every inch of the rep is just like everything that they are at that moment. That to me is like inspiring. I remember this one, certain experiences like this just stick with you, like from a visual perspective as well as like moments that you remember. I remember the first time I ever saw one of my closest friends who's a pro bodybuilder. I remember the first time I saw him do like a really hard set of leg press. Have you heard of the brand Kaiser? The pneumatic. Okay, so he was doing a Kaiser leg press with over whatever the max pressure on the machine was. It's over 1,000 pounds or whatever, and he's doing sets of like 30 with like rest pause. So he would do just do as many as he can. He would sit there and breathe, and I remember we were the only two people at the gym. And just watching him do like a grueling set of eventually what was like 30 plus reps without blinking, without making a sound other than just his breath. There was no music because no one else was there. It was like the most inspiring thing to me, because I was like, oh, that's what a set like is. And so when people have this big conversation about like how much volume should they do, I understand it's an important conversation. We have to have the conversation to some degree. But also, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about that set, or are we talking about like fucking around with the boys set? You know, those are two different worlds, you know? I have a question for you though.
No.
And don't forget what you were going to say, okay?
I'm going to write down.
Okay, good. How do you think that one can teach, or how do you think that someone can bridge that gap between lack of controlled aggression to controlled aggression? How have you gone about doing that for people?
So I think I like to start with, I guess we fill in the gaps. So sometimes, but not as often, I'm presented with people who are just very aggressive and I need to hone down their form. More often than not, they're able to just relax into a lift and follow instructions, but they need to work on their intensity. So I think in the beginning, what I would like to do is just maybe fill in the gaps. Let's assume we have somebody who's got the aggression, we need to hone in on form. I think that's easier, personally. I think it's easier to teach them form because it's tangible. You know, it's tangible. I think when you're going from what is somebody who's fairly timid but is willing to learn form, we can teach them form, but then to get that to work harder, I think it's a little less tangible. I mean, yeah, of course we can discuss rep slowdown, but it doesn't always work, because I think I've had occasions, and I know I have, where I've talked about rep slowdown and I've seen clients give me videos where they're purposely slowed their reps down, and I'm thinking, hey, bro, that's not what we're talking about. Which I think does go to my point that I was about to say, which is there is a moral attachment to discussions about intensity sometimes, because I think it's okay to tell somebody, look, change your form, do this, like squat with the bar in this position, maybe change your repetitions, maybe do more volume, which is a very easy topic to discuss. But if you say to somebody, look, that set that you told me was 0 RAR, was fucking 8 RAR, and there is a moral attachment. It's the same attachment where if you are a dieter who's not losing weight and you're saying to your coach, look, I'm in a deficit, or let's say you're on Reddit. Let's say you're on Reddit. I'm on Reddit. I'm on like or lose it or whatever, right? And I was like, look, I'm in a calorie deficit, but I'm not losing weight. And you know what the answer, like, you and I know what answers they're going to get. They're going to like, you're not in a deficit. And they're like, well, I'm tracking my calories. I'm eating 800 calories a day. I'm tracking them. Nothing's happening. You and I know for a fact what's going on. Like, they are not eating 800 calories a day, right? So just like that, there's a moral attachment when it comes to intensity, because they'll tell you, hey, coach, I'm training as hard as I can. And you're looking at the set going, brother, this is like a walk in the park. Like, you're not. Like, it's a much harder discussion to broach. And that's part of the difficulty. I mean, I like to think I'm a relatively gentle coach when I need to be. But very, very often, not very often, very, very sporadically, very, very occasionally, I've had clients where they've not taken that very well, you know, and it's like that discussion has not gone down very well because they see it as quite literally a moral judgment on them. And that's the difference between conversations about intensity versus conversations about volume or form or everything else we're talking about. That's what I mean. I don't know. I'd love to hear your perspective. Is that, I see you laughing, but is that something you can relate to? Because that's my full-time job is coaching. I've had these conversations. What do you think?
No, I mean, I think that's a fantastic point, and it's something that I hadn't considered as the difference between things which people can view as more objective versus subjective. So I think that's really good. That's really good insight. For me personally, I agree, because part of me was laughing because I'm conjuring up like past experiences with people. It is generally a lot easier for me in terms of my personality type and the kind of person that I work with to work with someone who is like overly aggressive and is doing like the macho man type of thing, because reliably my strategy in those instances is to kind of feed into the aggression. And I'll say something like, you think you're so tough, but you can't even control this fucking rep right now. Like you think you're so hard and you're making noise. I don't in the past, I have told specific clients, you gotta, I'm gonna make you earn the right to like make any noise right now. Like, until this set is hard. Right. But if I said that to client over here who started lifting 3 months ago, who is a woman my age or something like that. I'm thinking of a few specific people right now. Those types of communications are just off the table. So I think, like, for coaches listening to this, that's the most important thing. Is obviously it's trite but important in some weird way. Like, you meet your person where they're at. But for me, I do think that the former adjustment of turning the aggressive person more controlled is certainly more difficult than the alternative. I think something personally, for me that has worked well with getting the person who's overly cautious to maybe try a little bit more is like, it's crazy how little evidence they need to roll with something in general. So for example, like, if someone's scared of like, doing a row, let's say, with a little bit of like oomph, I'll just say I'll try to like create a scenario where the person is almost forgetting about themselves, like say something funny or do something like kind of absurd, and then eventually get to a point where I just say just pull hard, and when people do that kind of thing, they pull hard, they push hard, they squat with effort, whatever it is. You only need this. You need one rep to like just be, or one set rather, to just be completely like changing of a perspective. Other people obviously are not that way, and other people are stubborn and maybe will be forever. But I think at some point earlier we were discussing this concept of like not controlling other people. I mean, we have some degree of control in terms of like, hey, I'm just going to throw this like bit of stimulus with my words and my encouragement at you, but what they do with it is out of your control and out of mine.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that kind of relates back to the very first point we were talking about, just with regards to personalities and having people in your life who are willing and able to tell you that you're wrong. But equally, that comes with the responsibility of being able to take that in good faith and act on it and not get angry and stuff. And with the example I just gave, that happens very, very infrequently. It's not a common occurrence. For the most part, the way that I like to approach that discussion is talk about it like just another variable. Intensity is a variable, just like form is a variable, repetition range, cadence, these are all variables. Exercise selection is a variable too. And we try to view it as objectively as possible and provide them with examples of what working hard means and work towards that slowly. I think I kicked off with a fairly negative example there, but it's generally not what I experience with most people. But yeah, for comedy effect, it works. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that like one other thing I would say is, for me, actually just training with someone else and just not even necessarily saying anything, but just showing them what it looks like has been a really helpful experience. Some people don't take the hint. Others lock in and like immediately are taking it seriously. But I have found that for select, I have a few people in my mind that come up where it's like their whole perspective on training was shifted as a consequence of just like doing a normal, like just seeing what a normal session was like. And I think that much like my experience of like watching my training partner do that thing, there's something about that experience that just it literally cannot be translated with words.
On that, let's try and explore that a little bit and try and break it apart, because I agree with you completely, by the way. But I often get the question, what is it exactly? So what is it? Because I've had this experience before. I mean, just as a quick anecdote, this was years ago when we were powerlifting. I used to train with a crew, and we were all like national level powerlifters. It was a good crew, and one of the guys brought his friend along, and so he decided to train with us. He wanted to just join in and go all out. Hadn't really trained much before, and so we thought, okay, fine, we'll just put him through your paces. Now the day after, he messaged my friend. He's like, look, I'm really sore. I don't know what to do. So we would train squat, bench, deadlift in one session. And my friend was like, it's fine, like it's just soreness, don't worry about it, it is what it is. And he's like, no, I'm really worried, I'm going to take some ibuprofen. So he's like, yeah, like whatever, dude, just do what you need to do. And so we find out the next day he's in hospital. He's been in hospital for like 3 days. Turns out he took ibuprofen, never taken ibuprofen for his life, had an allergic reaction to it, found out he was allergic. So,
bro.
Like, training one day with us, put him in hospital for 3 days. That was our claim.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great trade-off. I mean, hey, at least he learned something.
He did. No ibuprofen. Yeah, and don't train that hard for the first time. Yeah. So, but yeah, going back to what I was saying, I mean, is there a way of quantifying like what we're talking about? Because I think, just to kick off the discussion, I think intensity is a big thing, but I think pacing is something which I think I see lacking when I get people who come and train with me occasionally. The pacing is lacking. Like while I used to time my rest periods, and I would take maybe consistent 2 minutes or whatever. Nowadays I don't, but the concept is it's regardless of the amount you rest. It's more the pacing. I just find with people who aren't quite there yet, they're more likely to take a break and just start talking and yapping and lose focus during the rest between sets. I think that the pacing can add to the intensity of a workout because you stay in the zone, you stay inclined to do hard sets, and you build that fatigue over the course of the session. Whereas if you're constantly yapping and getting distracted, it's not the same as just taking long rest periods. I think you lose the momentum, and you maybe potentially rest long enough where you're losing the fatigue that you're building and generating during the course of the session. So that's definitely, I would say, one part of it. Keen to know your thoughts.
Well, I would say just on like the indescribable bit, I think that like most things in life pan out this way, where there is a phase of like knowledge acquisition and learning where everything is theoretical. And then that is overlapped with like the initial like diving into the activity. You're trying kind of sort of figuring things out, but also like because your mind is in like the absorption stage and you don't know anything about anything. It's just like every opinion that comes at you feels like it's a valid opinion. You have no ability to sort of source things. And then you move on to a stage where maybe you start to form your own opinions. And not only do you start to form your own opinions, but maybe you know a little bit more. And so you start to form opinions that are not just experientially rooted, but are more like empirically rooted or rationally rooted. And a lot of people, I feel like, kind of get stuck in that stage where they've learned a little bit, so they know jargon, they know terms, they feel like they have enough of a knowledge base, both in experience and in study, to put their opinion onto others. But they're still in a stage where there's so much to be learned and to be developed. And the gap between that stage and the following one, which is like the I know nothing, but I'm still confident about the opinions that I have stage, is like the stage where you give equal weight to experience and empiricism, and you make decisions based on context. You don't slap on blanket absolute statements to everything because you feel like you need to have an opinion. You have conversations, maybe you make content, and you voice strong opinions, again, because you've earned the right to be confident about something. But I feel like the only way for anyone, especially who's listening, to get to that stage is to do it themselves and see it themselves. And I don't think that is the kind of thing, unlike some of these other things, that can be systematized or objectified in precisely the same way. It's like there are these things over here that we can quantify and measure and look to address systemically, or systematically rather. But then there are these other sort of intangibles. It's like when we say, focus in a session, like to some degree we can measure that and be like, well, how much of this time am I spending talking and fucking around versus training? But on a more like on the real level, focus in the room is like, it's like an energy. It's like how some days you walk into the gym and you're locked in and you're focused and you're just at peace. And then other times you come in, you got this stressful thing at work, you have this stressful thing with this friend that happened, maybe it's a health problem. It's like you can't quite get your mind to sort of zero in on something. So I feel like, and this may be ironically a kind of way to systematize what we're talking about, but it's to almost recognize that like some of these things can be put down and measured on paper, and some of these other things just simply can't be and will never be. It's like trying to describe to someone like what being in love is like. It's like you can articulate the way that you feel about your wife or your husband and like the way that they make you feel and what things you like about them and what they do for you. But you can never be like, here, have that feeling, It's like that person needs to experience that for themselves. And I feel like this is the part of training and lifting and all this stuff that can never be put into content. It can never be translated in the way that these other things can be. And I think that is the thing that like the information surge is killing the most, is like people leaning more and more into that, because in reality, that is the thing that allows people to feed back into the more systematic approaches, right? Because they care more, they give more of a fuck, and they're more focused.
I had a thought when you were talking. I think one of the issues with evidence-based and sort of the science in the space is that it tends to block off experimentation, because the whole point that which
is ironic, right?
Yeah, it is. And it's because it was supposed to be about asking questions. And I think I see it all the time when it comes to, because I did a video recently and I was asking the question of what has the evidence-based space actually added? And out of the comments that I received, a lot of them were saying it has added certainty to what we're doing. And that just made me smile. I didn't address it. You know where I'm going with this, because I think it adds a degree of certainty. It adds an illusion of certainty. I don't think it adds a great amount of certainty. It's somebody who has an answer. It isn't necessarily going to be the right answer for you. I think just having the illusion of certainty can be comforting for some people. And I think for a large part of things, I don't disagree with the idea of evidence-based lifting or evidence-based being in the space that we're in. What I disagree with is this idea that, right, this is the answer. Now, I think what that does is it has a consequence of people looking for that answer every year, whenever it changes, but stopping the self-experimentation and the taking ownership. Because if I was to give you just a personal anecdote to highlight what we're talking about, my training partners are a great example of this. I've been training with them for about a year. Now, when they first started with me, they were almost complete rank beginners. I had to direct everything that they did. At this point, they come in and we just have that groove. We're all in our zone. We have that locked in feeling. And when we're locked in, there's not even really any discussion. It's just done, done, done. Change plates, get in and done. They've achieved that level of mastery now after a year of lifting with me. And I think if they were to focus on the science and the evidence base and trying to try new things, whatever was a new flavor of the day, or trying to find a system, I think it would remove the autonomy, it would remove the independence that they are building and they're creating by trying things and learning from me in more of an organic context by just looking at what I'm doing and just really living it. So yeah, I mean, just to move it on to maybe a different point, but yeah, the whole evidence-based space and what it brings is great. But listen, what does it take away? What does it remove from us, from our self-experimentation, from our growth? I mean, I can talk you back to conversations I had in the year 2000 online with guys who were evidence-based back then and science-based. The limiting, I never really bought into it back then, but what I always felt they were limiting themselves because it always came across as an excuse. That was always the stereotype back then, was if you weren't involved in that space, you'd look at those guys and think, well, you're saying all these things, but actually they're just excuses, show physique. And so I think it cuts people off from experimentation and independence, which you need to achieve true mastery. Not for everyone, for a lot of guys, they're in the evidence-based space and they don't do that, but it's just I've been in the space long enough now. It's just interesting to see a fair few of the guys who are on the periphery of the evidence-based space, who call themselves evidence-based coaches, their recommendations look suspiciously like what bro's been saying all along, even though what they tell other people to do is based on the science. Like, I have a large degree of suspicion when somebody's saying, hey guys, you should eat 0.7 grams per pound. Well, how much do you eat? I eat about 1.3. Well, okay, well, that works for me. Well, that works for you. Yeah, that's what we're saying. That's the whole thing. So, yeah, wow, yeah, that's a big topic, isn't it?
Well, one of the things that I thought of amidst that is that the purpose of science and the purpose of evidence-based, whatever we want to call it, is not to provide certainty. I think people are very confused about that. The purpose of all science is not to provide certainty, which will sound crazy to some people because some people learn science as like the science, listen to the science, as if the science is fixed. No, the purpose of science to me is not to provide certainty, it's to provide directionality. So when we think about like training and like science-based recommendations, I have no problem with people saying, hey, this is what the current body of evidence around this topic in this population around this timeline suggests for this, particular outcome. Great. It's like kind of like when we were, I don't know if this will be in this conversation, we were talking about the concept of like apologizing, and how like apology between two people is the beginning of the conversation. It's like, to me, the recommendation is the beginning of like experimentation for yourself. So great, you have this 10 to 20 set per week, starting point. Cool. I don't care. Pick a number, roll with it, and then observe how that directionality actually helps you or doesn't. Because if you just sit there like kind of spinning your wheels in perpetuity, thinking that like eventually you will arrive at an answer, like good luck with that. And what most advanced people also recognize is that even when you arrive at a point where you're like, this is working, this is great, for how long? Like if then you settle in a position where you're like, this is good for me, well, guess what? Eventually you keep training hard enough for long enough, something else is going to come up and you're going to have to change what you're doing. So the whole point to me is remove the desire to, or attempt to remove the desire to become attached, and just view everything as like directional rather than like fixed points. There's nothing in life that appears to me to operate under a fixed model. Everything is squishy, everything is dynamic, everything is always changing, which to your point is destabilizing. It's scary. because the reality is that there are no firm answers to any of this stuff. And I think the sooner that people can lean into that, I think the better that people may become at making decisions. The more and more people who I encounter who are less attached to specific methods, like those are the people that just continue moving on. The people who get stuck are the people who find answers and never, seek to learn more. And that can actually be exactly what someone needs. Like if someone is at a point in their training where they're happy, they don't want anything to change, and like their physique is good where they want it, like by all means, stay exactly where you are. You've achieved your goals. But for most of us, the interesting thing is problem solving. And the only way to continue to problem solve is to never stop, thinking and being in motion with any of this stuff.
Hey, you know what? Just as soon as you think you got all the answers, your body changes the questions. That's my experience. Every decade that I've lifted, my 20s, 30s, 40s, something has changed, and no doubt things will change again in my 50s. But yeah, going back to your the point you started off with, this was always the conversation about science versus religion, and really what was used to be said was religion is what provides the illusion of certainty, whereas science is more questioning. So actually the opposite of what we see in our industry, but that kind of relates to something that I want to discuss is science in our industry has historically hasn't been of great quality. I'm looking back at the 90s with cybergenics and some of the early 2000s stuff with cyberpunk and the hit Jedis who abused science to promote their low volume protocols, super slow protocols, all to be unfair, a lot of the same stuff that Chris Beardsley is talking about now is, I recognize it from the early 2000s. Not any kind of judgment on Chris, but he's come to the conclusions he has because he's looking at the same data, because that's what they all focused on back then. Now, looking at it in terms of a meta point of view, that stuff died off in the end because it didn't take into account the human experience, and that led to the rise of evidence-based science in our community, because that's when we started to rebel against these recommendations which were being pulled from the science and the physiology, which just didn't reflect what we were experiencing, because they did all the low volume, low repetition stuff back then as well, like all the stable stuff back then. There were those conversations back then which completely ignored the human experience. Enter human experience with science, you have evidence-based, and that was the rise of evidence-based lifting. So the current crop of the evidence-based guys, whatever you think of them, they have arisen. They have been allowed to prosper because of the way that HIT effed everything up in the early 2000s. It's a natural consequence, and now it's no surprise we're seeing the rise of Chris Beardsley and the same arguments, because people are getting tired of what has become of the evidence-based space, when it should have been about the personal human experience, and it should have been about marrying the science with the personal experience, and actually it's just been perverted into something else. I think as a whole, science, whether it's been the wholly physiology related stuff or whether it's been the evidence-based stuff with which is a bit more fast and loose, it's been disappointing, and I think the issue with science providing the illusion of certainty, which is completely the opposite of what science should be providing, stems from science in this space just generally being of very, very poor quality and has been monetarily influenced. I mean, just one more thing. I'd love to know how you feel about this. When people do their studies and they say there's no conflict of interest, but they've got 5 books, 3 seminars this year, and an app. I mean, I've said that a few times, and people have said, well, no, it's still no conflict of interest. How can we say that, really?
Yeah, on that point in particular, I can confidently say that I don't know. I don't know whether there is or there isn't. I'm sure it's person dependent, but I think from the objective point of view, it certainly raises eyebrows. I mean, just the simple fact that there are many, I'll say, influencers whose job it is to report on the science. I don't think, to be charitable, I don't think that like most of these people's views are necessarily dependent on like their attachment to things. Like I think like, the Mensa ideology is like a fixed dogma, right? Whereas like it is possible now to conduct and report research in a way that is I'll say honest and integrity driven and not motivated by the metrics that we might think that they are. I just don't know, and I also don't think that like most people have to some degree, myself included. I don't think that most people have the scientific literacy, even in many instances, to be able to like discern these things and parse these things carefully and fully. And I think that a lot of what we see now in terms of the backlash has more to do with the way that information is translated rather than the information itself. I think that the information itself is not the problem. The data collected is not necessarily the problem, although someone who is more into the research than I am could speak on that. Maybe you could. Go ahead.
I think you're right, because I think even if you can interpret the research, I don't think it matters because people aren't interested. Because just like in politics, they're not interested in substance, they're interested in personalities. So even if you were to successfully tear apart a study, people aren't going to hear it. I mean, apparently you can write a PhD which is worth no more than a year 7 art project, but people will still say, hey, still love you, Mike, you've still taught me a lot. I mean, it doesn't matter anymore. It's all Fugazi, it's all WWE. It doesn't matter anymore. And I think that's the problem when it comes to science interpretation in this space. People say they're evidence-based, they say they're science-based, but they don't care. I mean, the prime example is, and I'm not sure, maybe this is a strong statement, but I don't think you can call yourself, because I've seen evidence-based coaches, when the evidence was placed in front of them, look the other way. I don't think they can call themselves an evidence-based coach if their only reaction to this PhD being absolute nonsense to go, well, he's always helped me. Come on, bro. Are you evidence-based or not? I just think with a lot, again, it's a problem with going back to what you were asking about with regards to, is it a problem with the science or the communication? I think it's both, but at the same time, if you were to be able to really tear apart the science and look at it logically and find some kind of truth, it wouldn't matter because people don't care. They're not in it for this, and most people don't have the literacy. They want to side with their favorites, even if the evidence is completely clear, like the way that Solomon presented it. They don't care. For most people, they want to side with their celebrities, or they side with an answer which is longer. It's the Reddit logic. If you've got more paragraphs than me, you're right. It's the Reddit logic. So I think a lot of times in our industry, as much as we complain about it, we don't do ourselves any favors either. And I mean collectively, not you and me, but collectively, we don't do ourselves any favors either, because we're just looking for an authority to believe in, because for the most part, people aren't taking it that seriously, and they don't have the literacy to really sift through what they think they do. And there's also a hint of arrogance where they don't want to say that's the case. Oh yeah, I understand it, but they don't really. Like, I've tried to sift through some stuff. It's hard. But ultimately, all you're left with is, well, this person said this. What do you think of that? Well, what do you think of it?
You know what my solution to all this is, Vaz? is in some sense I don't care, and in another sense I care a lot, which is I pretty much ignore this conversation in my practical experience. So as an example, to stick to the topic here, with this recent Israel PhD thing, okay? First of all, let me just say, I think if I put out a video that was in its title in defense of Mike, but it wasn't really in defense of Mike. It was in defense of intellectual honesty and rigor, because people who had clearly not done any of the work themselves were basically just sort of copy pasting the same message that Solomon had put out, which I have no problem with, as long as like the opinion is thought through and measured and is considering multiple sides. That's not what you saw from most people. I know you had a very neutral take, as you do with most things, I think, except for restaurants and those sorts of things. But in terms of like my own reaction and my advice, or my not my advice, but my word of caution to people, I guess, is like, if that kind of video and that kind of dissection of the PhD was something that drastically shifted your worldview about Mike, about science, about exercise science, about social media, then in the first place, it was likely that you were not thinking that hard, right? So like, for example, if, oh gosh, I don't want to name names because it's going to be just, like, imagine if you have very, very seemingly strong opinions about this political figure or that celebrity or this person at your gym, and one thing about them is revealed, and that thing is neither confirmed nor not confirmed, and yet your entire opinion of this person is changed upon this small bit of information that you don't even know, you don't even really recognize the truth of it or lack thereof. Well, then that means that your original opinion of the person was not on strong standing to begin with. Like if someone told me something crazy about my wife, I would probably laugh, because I would be like, no one knows her better than I do. And if that thing ended up being true, well then I have problems in my ability to, interpret and understand people, in a particular her. So my whole like takeaway from it, in my perspective, is like, I'm going to form opinions on my own about things that I feel comfortable to form opinions about in the first place. And if someone else's opinion is enough to drastically sway my worldview about a person or a topic, then it probably means that I was not taking that topic super seriously to begin with. And as a consequence of that, I should be extra cautious about whatever my new opinion is. Yeah. Right? So if someone was like, I can't believe this PhD in exercise science is this and this and this, well, it's like, okay, we probably did not do enough thinking about exercise science as a whole and the state of exercise science relative to another field, say physics, right? We had a very poor understanding of the relationship between fields, if you want to call both of them that, in the first place. So I think I'm kind of just repeating myself now, but it's just like that is telling to me.
For the record, when I said what I said earlier regarding evidence-based coaches, I wasn't referring to you. I thought your take was actually quite neutral, a lot like mine.
I don't identify as evidence-based. Okay. That's a naughty term to me now.
Okay, fair enough. Good. I'd like to explore that in a moment. So, yeah, I thought your take was quite neutral, and I thought it was sensible as always. And I do agree. I think if people, I think there is a case to be made where if something has opened your eyes on a particular topic, I think it's important to then acknowledge that you probably weren't that well read on that topic and maybe are not yet capable of making a strong, forming a strong opinion either way. And so, yes, approach with caution, which is my advice to a lot of people with this situation. I think this is the thing. I don't think a lot of people take that attitude because I think there's a sunk cost fallacy. It has switched some people's opinions, but I think for a lot of people, they're just like, well, you know what? We love you anyway. We don't really care. And I think there's an issue there because we are talking about, with the more important issue, we're talking about wasting people's time, essentially, people following advice, people getting hurt. I mean, one of my clients has been with me for about a year now. He was a full-on evidence-based convert, followed Mike and everything, tore his chest, tore his bicep, made hardly any progress, has made more progress in the last year than he did in the past 5 years. Now, that's not anything magical about my coaching. I'm giving him fairly standard recommendations and guiding him along the way, but he's finally at the point where he's able to train hard, despite the surgeries he's had on his chest and bicep. Perfectly natural guy, by the way, never taken, anything performance enhancing, which can exacerbate those issues. But it does have an effect on people. So if people are out there promoting this and acknowledging that, well, even if it's all fugazi, we don't really care because we love you. I think that is still an issue. But anyway,
no, I agree.
But what's the evidence-based thing?
Well, I was just going to say that, like, and I realized I didn't even say this earlier. With a case like Mike's, it's like I have an opinion of Mike, broadly speaking. That opinion was not swayed in any direction as a consequence of the PhD reveal thing coming out, because my opinions were not necessarily ever about him as a person. I met him once in person. I don't know him at all, so I don't feel I don't feel justified in having an opinion about him as a person in any way. However, this will focus maybe eventually. We'll just ignore it until, there we go. My opinions were always just about his ideas, and his credentials to me are totally irrelevant in relation to his ideas. Now, some people make, I think, a somewhat valid counter argument and say, well, he's kind of standing on the shoulders of this accredited label of PhD, and what does that mean for expertise more broadly, right? Expertise, broadly speaking, in the world right now is a very, very sensitive topic for most people. So I typically tend not to touch it with a 10-foot pole. But as it relates in particular to Mike, I have always just taken the approach of I'm going to adjust the ideas on their own merits, and I'm going to form opinions on those ideas, and I'm going to respond to those ideas. I'm not going to respond to him or anything personal. I'm not going to move into the direction of credentialism or the exact opposite. I think that is basically a separate conversation that people become trapped into, and mostly is a waste of time, in my personal opinion. What I was saying, though, about the evidence-based thing is I don't identify myself as that, because I don't think about research almost ever in my own training. And if I'm working with someone, I don't think about research almost ever. I don't cite research unless it is hyper relevant to a particular subject. For instance, an orthopedic surgeon felt entitled to make a comment on how leg extensions were bad. And in that instance, I'll pull up, 5 different studies, some of which are randomized control trials, some of which are meta-analytic studies, some of which are mechanism-based studies, all of which support or rather refute the idea that leg extensions are bad for your knees, right? That kind of research to me is the most relevant in addressing those kinds of claims. But I was just making that point to say that broadly speaking, I don't have this like cycle of PubMed in my head that is influencing my decisions day to day.
It's interesting you say that. On my YouTube channel banner, I took off the words evidence-based and I replaced them with results-focused or results-based.
Good. Yeah, good.
So, no, I'm right there with you. But yeah, I think I like what you're saying, because I think, my opinion didn't really change either. But the issue is we might be speaking from like a ivory tower kind of situation here, because I think the example that I always give to people who I'm discussing about this, if I hire a plumber to come round, and let's say they're rated the highest on Google reviews in my city, I'm expecting that plumber to know his shit. Now, if that plumber comes around and has some original ideas based on God knows what, and then I have to get him out again the day after, and nothing gets fixed, that's a problem. Now, in our industry, if we're talking about credentials, for people who are green to the field and are green to the industry, that's what they look at. And you get people who come in, you probably get this quite often as well. I get this that people will go through the Athlean X, then down into the Jeff Nippard, the Jeffrey Verges Field, then there's the Ben Yanes, and then down to the Faz lifts, and like they'll have to sift through those people having taken off years of their life, months of their life, potentially having injuries and holding themselves back. So I think, yes, I agree with you. It hadn't changed my opinion of him at all. My opinion remains exactly the same. And I'm glad my video came across as neutral, because that was the intention, is hopefully to get people to think. But credentials is an issue for the people that you and I will speak to and coach to on a regular basis. And I think for the people who you and I serve, I think it does make a difference. And there's just no regulation. Surely there should. I like what Solomon did, because it's a form of regulation in an industry which desperately needs it.
So I can agree with, I think, I can agree with all of that, actually. I think that for me, it just depends on the level at which I'm having the conversation. So if I'm having the conversation with you about my opinion of Mike before and after, we can have that conversation. But then if we zoom to a different level, we zoom out a little bit and we talk about, to use your phrase, people who are green to this industry, which is hilarious. By context, I've gleaned that means unfamiliar or new or inexperienced. Just in case anyone isn't familiar with your, your language over there on that side of the river. I just feel like, on the one hand, I'm like, credentials as a topic, really, really tough, right? Because like the example that a lot of people will give in this regard is like, if you are flying from New York to LA, right? You want the pilot to be an expert, right? And anyone who has ideas on the plane about how the plane should be flown, right? It would be silly to even consider the first thing that comes out of anyone's mouth if they're not credentialed, right? But then, and to your point about the plumber, right? It's like, the more you move from like pilot to exercise scientist in terms of the direct impact on people, the more fuzzy it gets and the less qualification actually matters in terms of the ideas and the outcomes, right? So like another example at the level of the pilot is like, my sister-in-law is currently in training to be an orthopedic surgeon. So like she's going to total more than a decade of very hyper-specific training to gain her credential as an orthopedic surgeon to then be able to do orthopedic surgery, right? So that is up there at the level of pilot, and on the individual level is even maybe more impactful, right? Given the statistics around surgeries versus flying and the safety of flying versus the relevant surgeries. So the more that the impact of the credentialed person is less identifiable in terms of like the objective outcomes, the less that credentials should probably matter. I'm comfortable saying that the less that credentials should probably matter, but what happens is the erosion of trust in credentials at the lower levels of like PhD and exercise scientists, that starts to erode the trust in credentials in areas which are much more impactful and important and relevant, right? So overall, it's hard to separate the discussion because a PhD in exercise science is very, very different than a PhD in some kind of physics-based field, right? In terms of the rigor and what would need to be involved and what that implies for someone's skill and someone's competence. So it's just like there's so many different layers to the conversation that I feel like everyone ultimately needs to be able to work through in their head, what does and should this credential mean for this thing that I'm doing? So I do feel for the person who is green to the field, who can't really discern the difference between Mike's PhD and the degree that my sister-in-law is getting. I feel for that person because they think they're equivalent in terms of rigor and implication, but also it is on that person simultaneously to be able to figure the fuck out like what is going to work for me and what isn't, Yeah. So you see, to me, it's just such a tricky conversation.
Well, ultimately, it is up to the person, of course. Personal responsibility is there, but I think there are also a couple of other factors which possibly confuse the situation, and that is status. As in beginner, intermediate status. If you're a beginner, pretty much anything can work. You turn up at the gym, you do some stuff, and it kind of produces a result, which can give you a lot of early confidence in that person. And I think the other thing is drugs. If you're looking at somebody who's pretty jacked, I mean, right now I weigh 170. I'm pretty lean, but 170 lean is a far cry away from stepping on stage at 220, relatively lean, at 5'3". So it's one of those where I think like that has an. I mean, the steroid thing is as old as bodybuilding itself, using alternate core reasons for your jackness to sell training information to people who are not taking steroids. So there's a couple of confounding factors too which come into it, which further confuse the conversation. Are we speaking to beginners where pretty much everything is likely to work, and also are we speaking to or is the message coming from guys who are enhanced where, again, take as much stuff as you like and pretty much anything's going to work? It confuses the issue.
I do very much agree, though, with the point that you made about the sort of speaking from an ivory tower perspective, because this is my job. I spend all of my time digesting this information and thinking about this information and applying it. So I certainly feel for the person who is new to or not even in the field, who is getting just massively confused about who to listen to. And so I just don't know where to direct my attention to that particular kind of person, other than to just be like, engage with the ideas. I don't know how else to go about it or to recommend going about it than to get people to develop their own ability to think. I just don't know what the other solution could be.
I mean, it's tough, dude, because as I say, going back to the example about plumbing and stuff, I'm not a very practical man. Okay, I make money, so I pay other men to do stuff that I don't want to do or I can't do. So I wouldn't have a clue if this guy came around, but if he's rated 5 stars in Google reviews,
Yeah, I'm with it.
not only would I not have a clue, I wouldn't want to have a clue because that's why I'm paying my money. And I think the big issue that I have with the fitness industry is you have people coming over from other professions who are professionals, who are lawyers, engineers, and very intelligent people. And they think that that's going to transfer over here because they don't know where else to look. And quite frankly, they don't have time. So, and like you and me, we do this for a living. And I love talking to you about it because I don't actually get to talk to many of the professionals about this kind of stuff. But for the average person, they don't have the time. And by the time they've really figured out that this is not working, they're maybe 2, 3, 4 years into it. And that might be some of the best years of their life. And, by that time, they're just, what's the word, red pilled, is it, or black pilled into accepting that their potential is a lot lower than it would have been if they had trained correctly. Just the example I'd give you from my own history. When I first started lifting in the year 99, all I wanted to do was bench 300, squat 400, deadlift 500. And I went all out for that first year that I officially started after losing some weight. I gained 50 pounds that year and I was just interested in getting my lifts up. By the end of that year, I could bench 200 pounds, I think 200-ish, squat about 330 and deadlift about 410. And I was big for an 18-year-old who trained back then. There weren't many 18-year-olds that trained back then. I was big because all I wanted to do was just get bigger and stronger. I think today's message is so freaking confused. And if I hadn't had that early experience, I wouldn't have had the confidence to go, right, I'm not only going to stop at a 200 bench, but because I was told when I stopped at a 200 pound bench, because I got stalled there, I was told, look, Faz, you've hit your genetic limit. That's it. You're cooked now. Just go and chill, enjoy for the rest of your life. I wouldn't have had the confidence to go, no, screw you. I'm going to carry on getting stronger and bigger. And I eventually hit the numbers that I hit, because if I had the early experience that some of these guys have where they're misdirected, they don't make any gains for years at a time because they're doing everything freaking wrong. They're emphasizing range of motion, length and partials over actually getting some freaking weight on the bar, then they wouldn't have had, they don't have the confidence to acknowledge that their genetic potential can lead them to do so much more than they currently are. Because by the time they've had 3 or 4 years of training, their mind is just set at a low expectation level due to their own experience. Mm-hmm. But it's not their own experience. They've just been misled. Mm-hmm. That's my issue, because I think there's just a greater issue. There's a greater negative effect on these people. And by the time they've learned the truth, they're either too old or they just don't have the right worldview. They go, have I pissed away my beginner game? Do I have the potential? And whenever somebody signs up to coach with me, I think they've all got potential, because if I did it, God knows they can do it. So that's an issue I think is less talked about. People, they set their minds due to those early failures, or they might even consider it a failure, they might consider it a success, but they haven't accomplished very much after a few years. They go, right, that's my potential. And I think that affects everything. They don't put as much effort into it. I put lots of effort into my lifting because it was something that I was really freaking good at from the beginning. And I carried on and got better and better because of that early confidence. I think a lot of people miss that because of this.
And so the question now remains, where do we go from here?
It's a big question, isn't it? Yeah. I don't know, man. I think I will just say, I love speaking to you about this kind of stuff. It's been really interesting.
Yeah, back at you, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it, dude. But yeah, we've been going for a couple hours, haven't we? Yeah, no. I don't know where we go from here. I think nothing has changed in the last 3 decades that I've been aware of the lifting space. And I don't think anything will change, because as soon as people wise up, there's a fresh generation of youngsters to take their place, to be fooled again.
Kind of seems like it's an unavoidable track for people to fall into, right? Like if we play devil's advocate for a second here, if I imagine that there's a person out there who finds my content first in one scenario, and then in an alternate reality, in a dual dimension, they find Mike's content first. I don't know who ends up having I don't know which scenario is a better experience for someone, right? Like I'm not so confident in what I'm doing to the degree that I think that it would be best for everyone. I think that it's possible for someone to land on someone's content. Like, just think about the worst example you can, like, okay, like, I mean, Athlete X's content is pretty, I think it's pretty, from a biomechanics standpoint, it's broadly speaking awful for the reason that there is the credential there and there is the jargon there, and yet so much of it is wrong or misinformed on just a purely objective level, saying things like lying leg curls are, should be thrown in the iron graveyard, is what he calls it.
Okay.
Blowing my mind. Yeah. I could imagine a scenario where maybe if I just really give it the benefit of the doubt, like maybe Athlete X's page is perfect for someone, and maybe my page is exactly what someone doesn't need. Maybe they're, for whatever collection of reasons, they respond better to a different kind of rhetoric. They're motivated more from watching someone else's video. So I'm willing to give a little bit of leeway to other people in that direction. I still think Athlete X's content is pretty much terrible in large part. And I'd love to have a debate with him about any of this stuff. But, you kind of see what I'm saying is, like, I'm just trying to get to a point where I don't think that I am the answer to people's problems, because ultimately, like, if we want to be charitable to Mike, like, I'm sure he's helped a lot of people, and maybe there are a lot of people who have been really sidetracked or even harmed by his advice. But much like anything else, I think that is just like such as it is with any kind of content creation. It's just you receive one message and you don't receive another. So I want to try my best to be charitable to that perspective. Oh, yeah. But I still do agree with you that it is a huge problem, and I don't think that anyone can get away with consuming content on the internet with some kind of pitfall like that. I just think you have to accept at the end of the day the trade-offs that come with consuming really anything,
So I think, because I want to end with a positive note, I think what I would like, first of all, I think these conversations help people. And I think secondly, I'd like people to just acknowledge that the evidence-based space that you see on the internet, all the information out there, which is just in your face every week, is actually a very small percentage of the majority of people who are interested in fitness. Quite frankly, if I go to even my gym, which is pretty much an influencer gym, very, very few people are involved or have heard of the evidence-based space, really know who Brad Schoenfeld is, God knows, very few people. I grew up around lifters, competitors and lifters around here who taught me how to lift, showed me how to work hard, what the basics were. All I would say to people on a positive note is just try and get out there a little bit, just like something like you and I touched on earlier in the podcast was just do some of your own experimentation. Don't be so beholden to what you learn and having to learn everything. Experiment a little bit, decide what works, see what works for you, and just ultimately have that guiding star of just getting bigger and stronger, because that's going to serve you well in your formative years. Don't think what you see on the internet represents all of bodybuilding, because it really doesn't. I mean, God knows there are some really good bodybuilding coaches on social media who are not interested in the research at all, and they don't get talked about enough, because there's some really respectable guys out there. I mean, just from the UK standard, Jordan Peters is one of them. He's been remarkably consistent with his coaching and with his message over the years. Got a lot of respect for that guy. I've had some disagreements with his philosophy in the past, but one thing you can't say about him is he makes stuff up. He's very real about what he does. He's very real, it's very raw. He does what he says, and he coaches his lifters like he says. And there are other guys out there who are real coaches, who you'll know over in the States, who aren't interested in science at all. They're just coaches who work with people on a daily basis. So as a positive note, I just say to people, just acknowledge that the evidence-based space is actually a very small part of lifting. Just get out there and learn for yourself as well. Just try and get out there, get bigger, stronger, see what sticks. Don't place too much importance on a lot of the infographics and the angry words you actually see online.
Wow, I think that's a perfect note to finish on. The last thing I'll say on top of that is, worst case scenario, you can buy Faz's ebook and it'll all be okay.
Yes. Yes. And also Ben's book, which I have, by the way, which I haven't read yet. Yes, Ben's biomechanics ebook. At first glance, looks great. So yeah.
Thanks, man. A lot of images in there, people. A lot of images. It's very straightforward. It all came straight from the dome. This was the first product that was ever just complete raw engagement with the mind and the screen, and no other outside opinions. So, yeah, I think it'll be interesting. We could talk more about it maybe another time. Talk more biomechanics stuff if you want.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, for the content you delivered, actually a very good price as well. Very good value for money. So yeah, one of the things I think I said this to you the first time we spoke. You actually brought me back to biomechanics because I had such a bad impression of it before with, I won't name them, but some other people. But yeah, so no, good stuff. It felt very authentic, so I like it. Anyway, Ben, should we leave it there? Good
Appreciate
man.
you, Faz.
Appreciate you, man. Take care. Have a good day.